I never thought my peaceful neighborhood in Scottsdale, Arizona would become a battlefield. But the moment I saw those massive granite boulders blocking the only road to my house, I knew my life was about to get complicated. My name is Aaron Dawson, and I had lived in the Sunrise Valley Estates community for 3 years with my wife, Sarah Owens. We chose this neighborhood because it seemed perfect. Manicured lawns, friendly neighbors, and a quiet cul-de-sac that dead-ended at our property. The houses were beautiful, the schools were good, and for the most part, everyone minded their own business. That was until Patricia Henderson became the president of our homeowners association. Patricia was exactly what you would picture when someone says HOA president on a power trip. She was a 52-year-old woman with short blonde hair that she kept in that severe bob cut that screamed, "I need to speak to your manager." She wore pearl necklaces even when she was just checking her mailbox, and she had a clipboard permanently attached to her hand. I swear that woman took notes on everything. If your grass was a 1/4 inch too long, she knew. If your garbage cans were visible from the street after collection hours, she documented it. And God forbid you painted your front door without getting written approval from the architectural committee that she also chaired. The trouble started about 6 months ago, when Patricia decided that the road leading to my house, which serviced only my property and one other home owned by an elderly couple named the Martins, was not technically a community road, but rather a private easement that the HOA had rights to control. Never mind that this road had existed for 15 years before the HOA was even formed. Never mind that it was the only way to access our properties. Patricia had gotten it into her head that because the road crossed through what she considered common area for about 50 feet, she had the authority to regulate it. Her first move was to institute quiet hours for the road, claiming that traffic noise was disturbing the wildlife habitat that the HOA was supposedly maintaining. This meant that between 9 p.m. and 7 a.m., no vehicles were supposed to use the road unless it was an emergency. I worked as a software engineer and sometimes had late meetings with colleagues on the West Coast, which meant I would occasionally come home around 10 or 11 p.m. Each time I did, I would find a violation notice stuck to my door the next morning. Then Patricia started with the speed limit signs. She had the HOA install signs claiming the speed limit on our road was 5 miles per hour. 5 miles per hour. I could walk faster than that. When I pointed out at an HOA meeting that this was ridiculous and that the county road regulations didn't even allow for speed limits that low on residential streets, Patricia simply smiled that tight little smile of hers and said, "This is private property, Mr. Dawson, and the HOA board has the authority to set reasonable rules for the safety and welfare of all residents." The thing was, Sarah and I were not the type to cause trouble. We paid our HOA dues on time. We kept our property immaculate. Sarah spent hours every week in our garden, making sure everything looked perfect. Our house was painted in approved colors, our holiday decorations were tasteful and put up only during approved timeframes, and we even volunteered for community events. But none of that mattered to Patricia. She seemed to have decided that we were her targets, and nothing we did would change that. The situation escalated when I started researching the property records and discovered that the road leading to our house was actually a recorded easement that existed long before the HOA was formed. It was a legal right-of-way, and the county had maintained it up until the developer handed over control to the HOA. I brought this information to the next board meeting, along with copies of the original plat maps and easement documents. Patricia did not like that one bit. Her face turned red, and she started shuffling through papers on the table in front of her. "These documents are outdated," she announced. "The HOA has obtained legal opinions that supersede these arrangements." "From what attorney?" I asked calmly. "Because I would like to see that opinion." "That is confidential HOA business," Patricia snapped. "And quite frankly, Mr. Dawson, your constant questioning of this board's authority is becoming a pattern of harassment." I almost laughed. Asking to see legal documentation that affects my property rights is harassment? "This meeting is not a forum for your personal grievances," she continued, and then she actually had me escorted out by her son, who apparently served as some kind of unofficial security for HOA meetings. His name was Derek, and he was a 28-year-old who still lived with his mother and seemed to exist solely to do her bidding. That was 3 weeks ago. This morning, I woke up to find that Patricia had taken things to a whole new level. I was getting ready for work around 7:30 when my phone rang. It was Tom Martin, my elderly neighbor whose property shared the same access road. "Aaron, have you been outside yet?" Tom's voice sounded stressed, which was unusual for the normally calm 75-year-old retired teacher. "No, why? What's going on?" "You need to see this. I'm looking out my window right now, and there are boulders, giant boulders blocking our road." I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean, boulders?" "I mean exactly that. Someone put massive rocks across the road entrance. There must be 4 or 5 of them, each one bigger than a washing machine. There is no way any vehicle is getting past them." I quickly pulled on my shoes and headed outside. Sure enough, where our road branched off from the main community street, there was now an impressive barrier of granite boulders, each one probably weighing several hundred pounds. They were arranged in a way that made it impossible for any car to pass. A person could walk between them, but that was it. And standing right there next to the boulders, clipboard in hand, was Patricia Henderson. "Good morning, Mr. Dawson," she said with that fake sweet voice she used when she knew she had done something outrageous. "I see you have noticed the new traffic calming installation." "Traffic calming?" I could feel my blood pressure rising. "Patricia, you have completely blocked the road. How am I supposed to get to work? How is Tom supposed to get to his medical appointments?" "The road is not blocked," she said primly. "There is pedestrian access. However, the HOA board held an emergency meeting last night, and we voted to temporarily close this section to vehicular traffic while we conduct a safety assessment and environmental impact study." "You cannot do that. This is an easement. It is a legal right of way." "Mr. Dawson, I understand you are upset, but this is for the good of the entire community. There have been complaints about erosion and potential damage to the native plant species in this area. We need to determine if continued vehicle traffic is sustainable." "Complaints from who? There are only 2 houses that use this road, and I know Tom didn't complain. So that means the only person complaining is you, Patricia." Her expression hardened. "Your tone is aggressive and inappropriate. The decision has been made. If you have concerns, you can submit them in writing to the board, and we will review them at our next scheduled meeting, which is in 3 weeks." 3 weeks? You expect us to go 3 weeks without access to our homes? "You have pedestrian access," she repeated, "and if you have an actual emergency, the HOA will consider granting temporary vehicular access on a case-by-case basis with 48 hours advance notice." I stared at her in disbelief. 48 hours advance notice for an emergency? Do you hear yourself? That is not how emergencies work. "Mr. Dawson, I'm trying to be reasonable here, but you are making this very difficult. The boulders stay. If you attempt to move them or damage them in any way, the HOA will pursue legal action and fine you for destruction of community property. Have a nice day." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the pavement. I immediately called Sarah, who was at her job as a physical therapist at a clinic across town. When I explained what had happened, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "She actually blocked the road with boulders?" Sarah finally said. "Aaron, this is insane. What are we supposed to do?" "I am calling a lawyer right now. This cannot be legal. She cannot just trap us in our own home." "What about getting to work?" "I guess I am parking on the main street and walking in. It is only about 200 feet, but still, this is absolutely ridiculous." Sarah was quiet for a moment. Aaron, I need to tell you something. I was going to wait until tonight, but given what is happening, you should know. I am pregnant." My heart leapt and then immediately sank as I looked at the boulders blocking our road. "Pregnant? Sarah, that's amazing. But now I'm even more determined to get this resolved. There is no way you are going to be walking 200 feet while pregnant, especially not when you are further along. I'm only about 6 weeks. We have time. But yes, we need to fix this. Can you imagine if I went into labor and we couldn't get an ambulance to the house?" That thought terrified me. "I'm calling a lawyer right now, and then I'm calling the county. There has to be someone who can stop this." I spent the rest of the morning making phone calls. The first lawyer I reached said he handled HOA disputes and would be happy to help for a $5,000 retainer. The second one said the same thing but wanted $7,000. The third one at least gave me some free advice. Technically, the HOA might have the right to temporarily restrict access for legitimate maintenance or safety concerns, but they had to provide reasonable alternative access and could not create an undue burden on property owners. The key word was reasonable, and clearly, blocking the only road to someone's house with boulders was not reasonable. I also called the Scottsdale County Roads Department. The woman who answered listened to my story and sounded sympathetic, but explained that if the road was on HOA property, the county could not do much about it. She suggested I contact the sheriff's office to see if the HOA had committed any criminal offenses, like creating a public safety hazard. The sheriff's deputy who came out that afternoon was a young guy named Officer Rodriguez. He looked at the boulders, took some photos, and interviewed both me and Tom Martin. He also tried to speak with Patricia, but she refused to come out of her house and instead sent her son Derek to deliver a message that she had no comment and that all questions should be directed to the HOA's attorney. "Look, Mr. Dawson," Officer Rodriguez said as he closed his notebook, "I'm going to be straight with you. This is a civil matter. The HOA is claiming they have authority over this road, and you are disputing that. That is not a criminal issue unless someone is actually being prevented from leaving their property entirely, which you are not since you can walk out. I know it is a pain, and I personally think it is a ridiculous thing for them to do, but my hands are tied." "What if there is an emergency?" I pressed. "What if someone needs an ambulance or the fire department? Then we will respond, and we will do whatever is necessary to access the property, including moving those boulders. But until that happens, this is a civil dispute that you need to resolve through the courts or through your HOA's internal processes." After Officer Rodriguez left, I sat on my front porch feeling defeated. Tom came over, looking equally frustrated. "Aaron, I am sorry you are dealing with this. Patricia has always been difficult, but this is beyond anything I have seen from her. Tom, I'm worried about you too. Don't you have a cardiology appointment next week?" He nodded. "I do. And frankly, at my age, walking 200 feet carrying anything is not easy. My knees are not what they used to be." We sat in silence for a while, both of us staring at those boulders like they were some kind of abstract art installation that neither of us had asked for. That evening, Sarah and I sat at our kitchen table and talked through our options. We could hire a lawyer and fight this, but that would cost thousands of dollars and could take months. We could try to go through the HOA's internal appeals process, but Patricia controlled that process, so it seemed futile. We could try to rally the other neighbors to vote her out at the next election, but that was not until next year. "Maybe we should just move," Sarah said quietly. "I know we love this house, but is it worth this stress? Especially with a baby coming?" I reached across the table and took her hand. "I don't want to let her win. This is our home. We did nothing wrong. If we leave, she will just do this to someone else." "I know. But Aaron, I am scared. What if something happens and we really do need help? What if I have complications with the pregnancy?" "Then we will make sure we can get help. I promise you, Sarah. I am not going to let anything happen to you." The next 2 weeks were frustrating beyond belief. I had to park my car on the main community street and walk to and from my house every day, carrying my laptop bag and whatever groceries or supplies we needed. Sarah did the same thing. Tom Martin struggled even more, and I helped him carry things whenever I could. His wife Martha had mobility issues and used a walker, so getting her in and out of their house became a major ordeal. I hired an attorney named James Rodriguez, no relation to the deputy, who specialized in property rights and HOA disputes. He charged me $3,000 up front and immediately sent a cease and desist letter to the HOA, demanding that they remove the boulders and restore access to the road. Patricia responded through the HOA's lawyer with a letter claiming that the temporary closure was within their rights and that they were conducting a legitimate environmental study. "An environmental study?" I said to James during our phone call. "There is nothing environmental about those boulders except that they are made of granite." "I know, Aaron, but they are going to drag this out as long as they can. I have filed for an emergency injunction with the court, but the earliest hearing I could get is in 3 weeks. 3 weeks turned into a date that I wrote on my calendar and counted down to like it was Christmas. But then, on a Wednesday evening, everything changed in the worst possible way. Sarah had been feeling off all day. She had texted me in the afternoon saying she felt some cramping and was leaving work early. When I got home around 6 p.m., walking up from where I had parked my car, I found her lying on our couch, her face pale and her hand on her stomach. "Sarah, what is wrong?" I knelt beside her immediately. "The cramping got worse, and Aaron, I am bleeding." My heart stopped. "How much?" "Enough that I am scared. I called my doctor and she said I need to go to the emergency room right away. This could be a miscarriage." I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 without even thinking. The dispatcher answered on the second ring. "911, what is your emergency?" "My wife is pregnant, about 8 weeks, and she's experiencing severe cramping and bleeding. We need an ambulance right away." The dispatcher took our address and assured me that an ambulance was being dispatched immediately. Then, she stayed on the line with me, asking questions about Sarah's symptoms and giving me instructions to keep her comfortable. About 7 minutes later, I heard sirens in the distance, but then they stopped. They stopped at the entrance to our road where the boulders were. I ran outside and saw the ambulance stopped at the barrier, lights flashing. 2 paramedics were out of the vehicle, staring at the massive rocks blocking their way. "What the hell?" one of them said when he saw me running toward them. "What are these boulders doing here?" "It is a long story involving our HOA, I said breathlessly. "Can you move them?" "Move them. These things weigh hundreds of pounds each. We would need heavy equipment." "My wife is inside. She is pregnant and bleeding. She needs to get to the hospital." The paramedics looked at each other. The older one, whose name tag said Miller, made a quick decision. "Get your wife. We will bring the gurney to your house. Let's go." We ran back to my house and the paramedics quickly assessed Sarah. Her blood pressure was low and she was clearly in distress. They got her onto the gurney and began the awkward process of wheeling her back down the road toward the ambulance. That is when Patricia appeared. She must have heard the sirens and came out to see what was happening. She stood near the boulders, watching as the paramedics struggled to maneuver the gurney around the rocks. "Excuse me," she called out. "This is HOA property and you are disturbing a protected area." Paramedic Miller stopped and turned to look at her with an expression of complete disbelief. "Madam, we are transporting a patient to the hospital. I don't care if this is the White House lawn. Get out of our way. I am the HOA president, and I am telling you that you are violating community rules. Lady, I will violate whatever rules I need to violate. Now move." Patricia actually took out her phone and started taking pictures. "I am documenting this violation. The HOA will be filing a complaint." I was so angry I could barely speak. "Patricia, my wife could be having a miscarriage. Do you understand that? She could be losing our baby and you are worried about taking pictures?" She did not even look at me. She just kept taking photos as the paramedics finally got Sarah past the boulders and into the ambulance. "Mr. Dawson, you are coming with us?" Paramedic Miller asked. "Yes, absolutely." I climbed into the back of the ambulance with Sarah, holding her hand as we rushed toward the hospital. She was crying, scared and in pain, and I felt completely helpless. All I could do was squeeze her hand and tell her that everything would be okay, even though I had no idea if it would be. At the hospital, we spent 4 agonizing hours in the emergency room. They did an ultrasound, ran blood tests, and monitored Sarah carefully. Finally, a doctor came in with news that made me weak with relief. The baby was okay. Sarah had experienced something called a subchorionic hemorrhage, which was essentially bleeding between the uterine wall and the gestational sac. It was serious, but the baby still had a heartbeat, and with bed rest and careful monitoring, the pregnancy could continue. "She needs to avoid stress and physical exertion," the doctor explained. "Any strenuous activity or additional stress could cause more bleeding and potentially lead to miscarriage. For the next several weeks, she should be on modified bed rest, which means limited activity and no heavy lifting or walking long distances." I thought immediately of the boulders. "Doctor, we have a situation at our home. Our HOA has blocked our road with large rocks, and we have to walk about 200 feet from where we can park our car to get to our house. Is that going to be a problem?" The doctor frowned. 200 feet of walking could be problematic given her condition, especially if she is carrying anything or the terrain is uneven. She really should not be walking any significant distance. Is there any way to resolve this situation? "I am working on it, but it has been difficult." "Well, work harder, because your wife's pregnancy may depend on it." I am giving her a medical note that she requires accessible parking and should not be required to walk long distances. If your HOA is preventing that, they could be liable for any complications that arise. When we finally got home around 1 in the morning, I had to drive as close to the boulders as possible and then help Sarah walk slowly to our house. Each step terrified me, worried that it would cause more bleeding. By the time we got inside, Sarah was exhausted and in tears. "This cannot continue," she said as I helped her into bed. "Aaron, I'm scared. What if this happens again and it is worse?" "It will not," I promised, "because tomorrow I'm going to fix this, whatever it takes." The next morning, after making sure Sarah was comfortable and had everything she needed within reach, I started making phone calls. My first call was to my attorney, James Rodriguez, and I explained everything that had happened the night before. "Aaron, this changes everything," he said. "The HOA has now created a legitimate health and safety hazard. We can file an emergency motion today. I will also contact the fire department and get their statement on record about the obstacles preventing emergency access." My second call was to the Scottsdale Fire Department's non-emergency line. I asked to speak with someone about emergency access issues, and I was connected with Battalion Chief Michael Brennan. Chief Brennan listened to my story without interrupting. When I finished, there was a pause, and then he said, "Give me your address. I'm coming to see this for myself." About an hour later, a fire department SUV pulled up to the community entrance, and Chief Brennan got out. He was a tall man in his mid-50s with gray hair and the kind of serious expression that made you instinctively trust him. He walked up to the boulders, examined them carefully, took measurements, and took several photos with his phone. "Mr. Dawson, I have been with the fire department for 30 years, and I have seen some stupid things, but this might take the cake," he said finally. "These boulders completely block emergency vehicle access to your property and your neighbor's property. That is a direct violation of fire code. Can you do something about it?" "I absolutely can. I'm going to issue a notice of violation to your HOA today. They will have 48 hours to remove these boulders and restore proper emergency access. If they do not comply, I will have them cited, and we can pursue criminal charges for creating a life safety hazard." "Thank you, Chief. You have no idea how much this means to me." "I have an idea, especially after what you told me about your wife. Nobody should have to go through what you two went through last night." He paused and then added, "I am also going to pay a visit to your HOA president and make sure she understands the seriousness of this situation." Chief Brennan was good to his word. That afternoon, he went to Patricia Henderson's house and delivered the violation notice in person. I was not there, but Tom Martin witnessed it from his window and called to tell me about it. "Aaron, you should have seen it. The fire chief knocked on her door, and when Patricia answered, he handed her some papers. She started arguing with him, but he was not having any of it. He told her, loud enough for me to hear from my house, that she had 48 hours to remove the boulders, or he would have her arrested for violating fire safety codes. She tried to say something about HOA authority, and he cut her off and said that fire codes supersede any HOA rules and that she was putting lives at risk. Her face was so red, I thought she was going to explode. I felt a surge of satisfaction. Finally, someone with actual authority was standing up to Patricia, but Patricia was not done yet. Instead of accepting defeat, she doubled down. That evening, I received an email from the HOA attorney stating that the HOA disputed the fire department's authority to dictate HOA policy and that the boulders would remain in place pending legal review. They also claimed that the HOA had obtained opinions from their own experts, stating that emergency access was still technically possible because emergency responders could maneuver around the boulders if necessary. I forwarded this email to Chief Brennan, who responded within minutes. "They want to play this game? Fine. I will be back tomorrow with the county prosecutor." The next morning, Chief Brennan returned, and this time he brought company. Along with him was a man in a suit who introduced himself as Deputy County Prosecutor William Martinez. They examined the boulders again, took more photos, and then went directly to Patricia's house. This time, I watched from my driveway as the confrontation unfolded. Patricia answered her door, and I could see her trying to maintain her composure as Chief Brennan introduced the prosecutor. The conversation lasted about 10 minutes, and I could not hear most of it, but I did hear Chief Brennan's voice raise at one point. "Madam, I am trying to give you a chance to fix this before it becomes a criminal matter. But if you insist on being stubborn, then we will do this the hard way." Patricia retreated inside her house, and Chief Brennan and Prosecutor Martinez walked back toward their vehicles. Chief Brennan stopped by my house on his way out. "Mr. Dawson, I have done everything I can to give the HOA a chance to resolve this reasonably. They have until 5 p.m. today to begin removing those boulders. If they have not started by then, I will be calling the sheriff's office and we will pursue criminal charges." "What kind of charges?" I asked. Prosecutor Martinez answered, "Creating a public safety hazard, reckless endangerment, and potentially interfering with emergency services. These are not minor offenses. If convicted, the HOA board members responsible could face fines and even jail time." 5 p.m. came and went. The boulders remained. At 6 p.m., 2 sheriff's deputies arrived, along with Chief Brennan and Prosecutor Martinez. They went to Patricia's house and knocked on her door. This time, Patricia did not answer. After several minutes, they left a notice on her door and then visited the other HOA board members. The HOA board consisted of Patricia as president, a man named Gregory Walsh as vice president, and a woman named Linda Foster as secretary. Both Gregory and Linda lived in the main part of the neighborhood and had apparently gone along with Patricia's scheme without much pushback. When the deputies visited Gregory Walsh, he apparently panicked and immediately started cooperating. Tom Martin, who seemed to have become my eyes and ears for all the neighborhood drama, called me with updates. "Aaron, Gregory just told the deputies that he voted against the boulders but was outvoted by Patricia and Linda. He said he has emails proving that he objected to the plan. I think he is trying to save himself." Linda Foster was not home when the deputies arrived, but they left a notice for her as well. That evening, I received a call from Prosecutor Martinez. "Mr. Dawson, I wanted to let you know that we will be filing criminal charges against Patricia Henderson and Linda Foster tomorrow morning. Gregory Walsh is cooperating with our investigation and will not be charged. We are also filing a civil action to compel the immediate removal of the boulders." "How long will that take?" "Given the emergency nature of the situation and the clear fire code violations, I expect we will get a court order by tomorrow afternoon. In the meantime, the county is authorizing emergency removal of the boulders. We have a contractor with heavy equipment standing by, and they will be there first thing in the morning." I almost cried with relief. Thank you so much." "No thanks needed. This is what we are supposed to do, and Mr. Dawson, tell your wife to take care of herself and that baby." The next morning at 8 a.m., a large truck with a crane arrived at our neighborhood entrance, and along with several workers in safety vests. Chief Brennan was there supervising, along with a deputy to ensure there was no interference. The workers attached chains to the boulders one by one and lifted them onto the truck bed. The whole process took about 2 hours. I watched the entire thing from the road, and I cannot describe the feeling of satisfaction I had seeing those boulders finally being removed. Tom Martin came out and stood with me, both of us grinning like kids on Christmas morning. "Freedom," Tom said simply. Patricia Henderson did come out during the removal, clipboard in hand, taking photos and shouting about how this was illegal and the HOA would be suing everyone involved. Chief Brennan walked over to her calmly and said something I could not hear, but whatever it was made Patricia go silent and retreat back into her house. Later that day, I learned from Chief Brennan that he had told Patricia she was currently under investigation for criminal charges, and that anything she said or did could be used as evidence against her. He had advised her to contact a lawyer and stop interfering with the boulder removal or face additional charges for obstruction. With the road finally clear, I was able to drive right up to my house for the first time in weeks. I brought Sarah out to see it, supporting her carefully as she walked slowly to the car. "It is over," I told her. "We can drive right to our house again." She leaned against me, tears in her eyes. "I was so scared, Aaron. I thought we might lose the baby because of this." "I know, but it is going to be okay now. The doctor said if you rest and avoid stress, the pregnancy should be fine." Over the next few weeks, the legal situation with Patricia and the HOA unfolded in a way that was both satisfying and a little surreal. Patricia Henderson and Linda Foster were formally charged with reckless endangerment and creating a public safety hazard. They both hired lawyers and initially tried to fight the charges, claiming they had HOA authority to make decisions about community property. The county prosecutor shut that down quickly. In a preliminary hearing, Prosecutor Martinez argued that no HOA had the authority to violate state fire codes or create situations that endangered residents' lives. The judge agreed and refused to dismiss the charges. Facing the possibility of criminal convictions, both Patricia and Linda eventually accepted plea deals. They each pleaded guilty to reduced charges of creating a public nuisance and reckless conduct. They were sentenced to 200 hours of community service, ordered to pay substantial fines, and were permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in the state of Arizona. The HOA itself faced consequences too. Several residents, encouraged by what had happened, called for an emergency meeting to remove the entire board and elect new leadership. The meeting happened 3 weeks after the boulders were removed, and the community room was packed. Tom Martin and I both spoke about what we had been put through, and Sarah, who was feeling better by then, also addressed the group and talked about how the HOA's actions had nearly caused her to lose our baby. The vote was overwhelming. Patricia, Linda, and Gregory, who had technically resigned already, were all removed from the board, and a new board was elected, consisting of 3 reasonable people who promised to run the HOA in a way that actually served the community rather than wielding power over it. My attorney, James Rodriguez, also filed a civil lawsuit against the HOA on behalf of both me and Tom Martin, seeking damages for the emotional distress, the medical emergency, and the costs we had incurred because of the blocked road. The HOA's insurance company settled fairly quickly, not wanting to go to trial with such a clear-cut case of negligence. Tom and I each received a settlement that covered all our legal fees, and then some. But beyond the money, what mattered most was that our neighborhood returned to being a peaceful place to live. The new HOA board focused on actual maintenance issues and community improvement rather than petty power plays. They even reached out to Sarah and me personally to apologize for what we had been through. Sarah's pregnancy progressed well after that stressful beginning. She followed her doctor's orders, rested when she needed to, and the subchorionic hemorrhage eventually resolved itself. We had regular ultrasounds and checkups, and each time we heard that strong little heartbeat, I felt a wave of gratitude that things had turned out okay. 7 months after the Boulder incident, Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby girl. We named her Emma, and she was absolutely perfect. When we brought her home from the hospital, driving right up to our front door without any obstacles in the way, I felt like we had truly won. Tom and Martha Martin came over the next day to meet Emma, bringing gifts and congratulations. Tom held the baby gently and smiled. You know, Aaron, when those boulders first appeared, I thought about just giving up and moving away. I'm too old to fight battles like this. But watching you stand up to Patricia and seeing justice actually prevail, it restored my faith a bit. Tom, you helped too. Your testimony and support meant everything. Well, I'm just glad I got to witness it, and I'm glad Emma will grow up in a neighborhood where common sense won out over tyranny. Patricia Henderson moved away about 2 months after her sentencing. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she could not handle the humiliation of facing everyone after what she had done. Her house sold quickly, and a nice young couple moved in. They introduced themselves to all the neighbors, including me, and seemed genuinely friendly. Linda Foster also moved, though I do not know where she went. Gregory Walsh stayed in the neighborhood but kept a very low profile. He apologized to me personally one day when we ran into each other at the community mailboxes. Aaron, I just want you to know that I really did object to those boulders. Patricia was convinced that she had the legal right to do it, and I should have fought harder against it. I am sorry for what you and Sarah went through. I appreciated the apology, though part of me felt he should have done more to stop it before it got so out of hand. But I also understood that standing up to someone like Patricia took courage, and not everyone had it. Chief Brennan stopped by our house a few months after Emma was born. He wanted to see the baby and make sure everything had worked out okay. She is beautiful, he said, looking at Emma sleeping in her crib. And you know, Mr. Dawson, I've been thinking about your situation a lot. It really highlighted some gaps in how HOAs are regulated in this state. I've been talking with some folks in the state legislature about proposing new laws that would give fire departments more oversight authority when it comes to emergency access in HOA communities. That would be incredible, Chief. What you did for us, stepping in when you did, I honestly think you saved Sarah's pregnancy and maybe even her life. If we had not been able to get help when we needed it, things could have been so much worse. That is exactly why these laws are needed. HOAs serve a purpose, but they cannot be allowed to endanger residents' safety. I am going to keep pushing for these changes. True to his word, Chief Brennan became something of an advocate for HOA reform. About a year later, Arizona passed new legislation that gave fire departments explicit authority to override HOA rules that interfered with emergency access and imposed strict penalties for HOAs that violated fire codes. The law was informally nicknamed Emma's Law by some people who knew the story behind it, though it was officially called the Emergency Access Protection Act. As Emma grew from an infant to a toddler, Sarah and I settled into our new normal. We both stayed active in the HOA, attending meetings and making sure that the new board stayed focused on serving the community rather than controlling it. We wanted to make sure that what happened to us never happened to anyone else. The road that had caused so much trouble became something of a symbol for us. Every time I drove up that road to our house, I remembered what we had fought for and what we had nearly lost. It made me appreciate our home and our family even more. Tom and Martha Martin became like surrogate grandparents to Emma. Tom would come over and read her stories, and Martha taught Sarah some of her baking recipes. The sense of community that we had hoped for when we first moved to Sunrise Valley Estates finally became real, but only after we had fought for it. Looking back on the whole experience, I learned some important lessons. First, never assume that just because someone has authority, they will use it wisely or fairly. Patricia Henderson had been given a position of trust and power, and she abused it terribly. Second, sometimes you have to stand up and fight, even when it is exhausting and expensive and scary. If I had just accepted the Boulders and found a way to live with them, Sarah might have lost our baby, and Patricia would have gone on to torment other residents. Third, there are still good people in positions of authority who will do the right thing. Chief Brennan did not have to get as involved as he did. He could have just issued the violation notice and moved on. But he recognized that our situation was serious, and he used his authority and experience to make sure we got the help we needed. And finally, community matters. When the neighborhood rallied to remove Patricia and the corrupt board, it showed that when people come together around what is right, they can overcome even entrenched power structures. I often wonder what would have happened if Sarah had not had that medical emergency. Would I have eventually given up and accepted the Boulders? Would we have moved away? Or would I have found some other way to fight Patricia's tyranny? I will never know, because that emergency changed everything and forced the situation to a crisis point that could not be ignored. In a strange way, as traumatic as that night was, it might have saved us. It exposed just how dangerous and unreasonable Patricia's actions were, and it brought in authorities who had the power to stop her. Without that emergency, we might have been stuck in legal battles for years. Now, as I write this story, Emma is 2 years old, and Sarah is pregnant again with our second child, a boy we are going to name Andrew. This pregnancy has been much easier than the first, with no complications or bleeding. We have a clear road to our house, a supportive HOA board, and a community that looks out for each other. Sometimes Emma and I walk down to where the Boulders used to be, and I tell her a simplified version of the story. She does not understand it yet, but someday she will. Someday I will explain to her how her mom and I fought for our home and our family, and how sometimes standing up for what is right means going up against people who seem powerful, but are really just bullies with clipboards. Patricia Henderson's Boulders are long gone, hauled away to wherever granite boulders go when they are no longer being used as weapons in suburban power struggles. But the memory of them remains, at least for me. They are a reminder that home ownership is not just about paying your mortgage and mowing your lawn. Sometimes it is about defending your rights and your family against people who think they know better than you how you should live your life. The fire department kept one of the photos of the Boulders blocking the road, and Chief Brennan had it framed in his office as an example of what not to do. He told me that he uses it in training sessions to teach firefighters and emergency responders about access issues and how to identify and report hazards in residential communities. Our story also made some local news coverage, which brought attention to HOA abuses in general. Several other residents from different HOAs around Scottsdale reached out to share their own horror stories. Some had been fined thousands of dollars for trivial violations. Others had been denied reasonable accommodations or had their property rights violated in various ways. It became clear that Patricia Henderson was not unique. She was just one example of a much broader problem. The attention led to some positive changes beyond Emma's law. Several HOAs in the area revised their governing documents to include more checks and balances on board authority. Some communities implemented recall procedures that made it easier for residents to remove board members who were abusing their power. And a few HOAs even disbanded entirely, with residents deciding they would rather handle their own property maintenance than deal with the hassles of HOA governance. As for the lawsuit, the settlement money we received ended up going toward Emma's college fund and some home improvements. We used part of it to install a really nice playground in our backyard, with swings and a slide and a sandbox. Emma loves it, and Tom Martin jokes that he wishes we had built it sooner so he could enjoy it too. Martha Martin's health declined a bit over the years, and there were a few times when Tom called 911 for her. Each time, the ambulance was able to drive right up to their house without any obstacles. Tom would thank me every time, as if I was personally responsible for the clear road, even though all I did was refuse to accept an unreasonable situation. "You stood up when it mattered," Tom told me once. "A lot of people would not have done that. They would have complained, but ultimately just accepted it. You fought back, and it made a difference not just for you, but for me and Martha too." Sarah went back to work part-time after Emma was born, and she loves being a mom. The stress of that difficult early pregnancy is mostly behind us, though she admits that she still gets anxious sometimes when she thinks about what might have happened. We both do. But we also feel incredibly grateful for how things turned out. Our neighborhood continues to be a good place to live. The new HOA board is boring in the best possible way. They handle basic maintenance, organize an occasional community event, and otherwise leave people alone. That is exactly what an HOA should be. I sometimes see Derek Henderson, Patricia's son, around the neighborhood. He still lives in the house his mother used to own, having apparently bought it from her when she moved. He avoids eye contact with me and has never apologized for his role in supporting his mother's actions. I do not hold it against him too much. He was just doing what his mother told him to do. But I do hope he learned something from seeing how badly things turned out for her. The holidays are always special in our neighborhood now. The HOA actually sponsors a winter festival with lights and decorations and a visit from Santa, which Emma absolutely loves. It is exactly the kind of community event that brings people together, and it is such a stark contrast to the divisive, controlling atmosphere that Patricia created. One year, during the festival, I was standing near the road entrance, watching Emma play in the snow that we had brought in for the kids, and I thought about those boulders. I thought about how much conflict and pain they had caused, and how something as simple as blocking a road had nearly destroyed our family. It seemed almost absurd in retrospect, but it had been terrifyingly real at the time. Chief Brennan attended that festival, and we talked about how things had changed. "You know, Aaron, your situation was a wake-up call for a lot of people in emergency services. We realized that HOAs are creating problems we never had to deal with before. Gated communities, private roads, overzealous rules that interfere with emergency response. We have had to completely rethink how we approach these situations. I am glad something good came out of it, Chief, but I wish it had not taken such a traumatic experience to make it happen. That is often how change works, unfortunately. It takes a crisis to force people to pay attention, but you handled it the right way. You did not give up, and you did not take matters into your own hands in a way that would have made things worse. You used the system, even when it seemed like the system was not working." "I had good help," I said, looking at him. "If you had not gotten involved, I do not know what would have happened. I was just doing my job, but I'm glad I could help." As the years passed, The Boulder incident became part of our family story, something we would tell Emma and eventually Andrew. It became part of the neighborhood lore too, the cautionary tale about what happens when HOAs go too far and what happens when residents stand up for their rights. Patricia Henderson's name became synonymous in our community with HOA abuse, which is probably not the legacy she imagined when she first took on the role of president. I heard that she moved to another state, though I do not know where. Part of me hopes she learned something from the experience and became a better person, but another part of me doubts it. People like Patricia rarely change. They just find new places to exercise their need for control. Linda Foster apparently also moved to another state, and Gregory Walsh eventually sold his house and moved to a condo in downtown Scottsdale, away from any HOA community. I do not blame him. After what he witnessed, I imagine he had no desire to ever deal with an HOA again. The emotional toll of the Boulder incident took a while to fully process. Sarah had nightmares for months about being trapped in our house, unable to get help. I had anxiety every time she felt the slightest bit unwell during her second pregnancy. But we worked through it together, and eventually those fears faded. We also became much more involved in local politics and community organizing. We attended city council meetings when there were discussions about HOA regulations. We joined advocacy groups that pushed for homeowner rights. We wanted to make sure that what happened to us became harder for other HOAs to do to other residents. Emma is a happy, healthy child who loves to play outside, read books, and ask a million questions about everything. When she is old enough, I will take her to visit Chief Brennan at the fire station and show her where he works. And I will explain to her that sometimes, when bad things happen, there are good people who step in to help. And I will teach her that standing up for what is right is always worth it, even when it is hard. Andrew is due in a few months, and we are busy preparing for his arrival. Emma is excited to be a big sister, though I'm not sure she fully understands what that means yet. Sarah is feeling great this pregnancy, and we are confident that everything will go smoothly. Our house is full of life and love, and our road is clear and open. That is all I ever wanted. A safe place for my family, free from unnecessary interference and arbitrary power plays. It should not have been so hard to achieve, but I'm grateful that we persevered. The community garden that the HOA maintains has a memorial bench now, dedicated to the idea of community over control. It was installed by the new board as a reminder of what HOAs should be about. Sarah and I sit there sometimes watching Emma play, and we talk about how far we have come. Life has a way of testing you when you least expect it. Those boulders were our test, and while it was one of the most stressful experiences of our lives, we passed it. We protected our family, we stood up for our rights, and we helped create positive change that will benefit others. That is something to be proud of. As I finish writing this account, I can hear Emma laughing outside as she plays in the sprinklers with the neighbor kids. Sarah is making dinner in the kitchen, and the smell of her cooking fills the house. These are the moments that matter, the everyday joys that we almost lost because of one woman's obsession with control. The boulders are gone, but their lesson remains. Never take your rights for granted. Never assume that authority figures have your best interests at heart, and never be afraid to fight for what matters, even when the odds seem stacked against you. Sometimes justice prevails. Sometimes the good guys win. And sometimes a fire chief with integrity makes all the difference in the world.